June 1944, somewhere in rural France. A German supply convoy moves through the night, with headlights dimmed to avoid Allied aircraft. The road is quiet, the countryside dark. Then the lead truck hits something small on the asphalt, a metallic object no larger than a man's fist. The tire bursts instantly. Seconds later, the second truck hits another, then the third. Within minutes, the entire convoy is stranded, engines running, men shouting, air hissing out of shredded rubber. When the drivers climb down to investigate, they find the road littered with twisted metal shapes, each one bristling with 4 sharp spikes, arranged so that no matter how it lands, one point always faces upward. The Germans had just encountered a weapon older than gunpowder, repurposed for modern war. British engineers had taken medieval technology and turned it into a mass-produced sabotage tool. It was cheap, simple, and devastatingly effective. The device was called a caltrop, and during the summer of 1944, it helped cripple German logistics across occupied France. According to French regional archives, resistance fighters scattered these devices across major road networks throughout northern France. Thousands were deployed. German reports from the period described the campaign as a plague. The British had another name for it. They called it Plan Tortue, the tortoise plan, because its purpose was simple: slow the enemy to a crawl. Germany's central problem in France was distance. When Allied forces landed in Normandy, German reinforcements were stationed hundreds of kilometers away. Divisions had to move by road and rail to reach the beach. The Wehrmacht relied heavily on truck convoys to transport troops, ammunition, fuel, and food. Every stretch of road became a vulnerability. Every journey was an opportunity for interference. The French resistance understood this. So did the Special Operations Executive in London. But exploiting those vulnerabilities posed a challenge. Traditional sabotage relied on explosives, detonators, and technical skill. Rail lines could be blown, but bridges were heavily guarded, and tracks could be repaired quickly. What so needed was something far simpler, a weapon that required no training, something that could be deployed by a farmer, a shopkeeper, or a teenager, something that could be scattered across a road in seconds, and just as easily abandoned if a German patrol appeared. The answer came not from modern engineering, but from history books. Roman legions had used caltrops to break cavalry charges. Medieval armies scattered them to slow advancing infantry. British engineers realized that the same principle could be applied to rubber tires. Pneumatic wheels were vulnerable in a way iron-shod horses never were. The center of this innovation was Station 9, located at the Frith Mansion near Welwyn Garden City. Officially designated on the 19th of July 1940, it served as SOE's primary research and development facility. Lieutenant Colonel John Dolphin commanded the station, while Professor D.M. Newitt led scientific research. Their brief was clear: create equipment light enough for parachute drops, strong enough to survive impact, simple enough for untrained users, and impossible to trace back to Britain. The caltrop met every requirement. Imperial War. Museum records describe the standard caltrop as measuring roughly 59 by 59 by 51 millimeters, made of solid metal. Its tetrahedral shape ensured that no matter how it landed, one spike would always point upward. It required no assembly, no instructions. Scatter it on a road and drive away. The American Office of Strategic Services developed a similar device. Their version measured approximately 8.6 centimeters per side and featured hollow spikes, allowing air to escape even if the tip became clogged with mud or soft ground. Dr. Stanley Lowe, head of OSS Research and Development, later described it as the simplest weapon we ever made. SOE did not stop there. British engineers also designed more discreet tire sabotage tools. One was the coin-type tire slasher, now held in the Imperial War Museum collection. Roughly the size of a large coin, it concealed a small curved blade deployed by a lever. At a glance, it looked harmless. In reality, it could slice through a tire sidewall with a single press. One example was issued to Wing Commander Forrest Frederick Edward Yote Thomas, known as the White Rabbit, before his missions into occupied France. Another design was the Dagger Jackknife DB clasp knife. When closed, it looked like an ordinary pocket knife. Hidden at the pommel was a claw-shaped blade, designed specifically for slashing tires. Both tools were manufactured sterile, carrying no markings that could identify their origin. Production and distribution were handled by Station 12 at Aston House near Stevenage, commanded by Colonel Leslie J. Cardew Wood, One historian later described him as a strong candidate for the real-world inspiration, behind Q from the James Bond novels. By late 1942, 2 or 3 lorries a day left Aston House, loaded with clandestine equipment, destined for occupied Europe. Records show the facility produced over 12 million time delay detonators and nearly 40,000 specialized mines. Exact numbers for caltrops remain unclear, but the design required minimal materials and could be stamped out in enormous quantities. Getting these devices into France was a logistical operation in itself. Supplies were delivered primarily by parachute drop, using CLE canisters. The Mark I container measured about 1.7 meters long and 40 centimeters in diameter, with a capacity of roughly 159 kilograms. RAF Tempsford served as the main departure airfield. Halifax bombers carried up to 15 containers per sort. Sterling aircraft managed up to 20. In total, around 10,000 tons of equipment were delivered to France, with roughly 4,000 tons before D-Day and 6,000 after. By June 1944, London maintained wireless contact with around 50 resistance networks across France. Plan Tortue was activated on the 5th and the 6th of June through coded personal messages broadcast by the BBC. One of the trigger phrases was deliberately mundane: "Ill fate, sure à Suez, it is hot in Suez." Once activated, resistance groups moved quickly. French departmental archives record widespread deployment of tire-puncturing devices on major roads. One report notes that resistance fighters did not fail to sew special nails on the roads. In Sector 146 near sea, fighters scattered caltrops and removed road signs to disorient German convoys throughout July and August. The most famous example of transport disruption involved the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, stationed near Montauban in southern France. The division was ordered to move north after the invasion. Under normal conditions, the journey should have taken 3 days. It took 17. SO's after-action reports later stated that the additional delay imposed on what should have been a rapid movement will have been of decisive importance in securing the Normandy bridgehead. Historical accuracy, however, requires nuance. Railway sabotage accounted for much of the delay. Tony Brooks's pimento circuit drained axle oil from rail cars and replaced it with abrasive powder supplied by SO. Trees were felled across roads. Ambushes by Macchi units forced detours. Allied airstrikes destroyed fuel trains guided by special air service teams. Caltrops alone did not stop Das Reich, but they added friction at every stage. The Imperial War Museum itself notes that coin-type tire slashers were of limited use against thick-walled military tires. Caltrops were most effective against civilian vehicles pressed into service. Staff cars, requisition trucks, and softer tires not designed for combat conditions. Still, their cumulative effect mattered. German countermeasures were brutal. Convoys were escorted. Routes were inspected. Reprisals were carried out against civilians. In September 1940, General Otto von Stulpnagel announced that no mercy would be shown to sabotage. The passage of Das Reich through the Limousin region, known by Germans as Little Russia because of resistance activity, culminated in atrocities. On the 10th of June 1944, 642 civilians were murdered at Orad. The day before, 99 civilians were hanged in Toul. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel acknowledged that acts of sabotage had become frequent and disturbing in France and Belgium. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force later credited resistance operations with imposing delays on every German division moving toward Normandy. The value of the caltrop was never measured by individual punctured tires. It was measured in cumulative friction. Every disabled truck meant troops arriving late, ammunition running short, commanders making decisions without full strength. Small delays multiplied into operational consequences. The caltrop embodied something fundamental about British unconventional warfare. While Germany invested in complex weapon systems, Britain invested in cheap, mass-produced tools that turned occupied populations into force multipliers. A single supply canister could contain enough caltrops to block a road for hours. 100 canisters could disrupt an entire REGIONMRD foot. The official historian of SO later noted that the organization revived medieval devices such as the caltrop, adapting them for modern war. The technology was ancient, the application was modern. The effect, though impossible to quantify precisely, contributed to the broader campaign that prevented German reinforcements from reaching Normandy at full strength during the critical early weeks. British engineers did not invent the caltrop. They did something more characteristic of British wartime innovation. They recognized an old solution to a new problem, manufactured it efficiently, and placed it in the hands of people who needed it most. It cost almost nothing. It required